Stephen William Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, in Oxford, England. Remarkably, on the 300th anniversary of Galileo Galilei's death, a detail that later felt symbolic for a man who would redefine our understanding of the universe. His parents, Frank and Isabel Hawking, were both highly educated, though the family was far from wealthy. Frank worked as a medical researcher, while Isabel had studied philosophy, politics, and economics. Their household was filled with books, debates, and the belief that knowledge was one of the greatest treasures a person could pursue. As a boy, Stephen was quiet, thoughtful, and endlessly curious. While other children played outdoors, he was often found dismantling clocks, radios, and toy trains, trying to understand how they worked. His early fascination with mechanics earned him the nickname Einstein among his school friends, though his grades were not always outstanding. Teachers noticed that he was far more interested in asking big questions about time, space, and the universe than in memorizing facts for exams. Despite his brilliance, Stephen's school years were not always easy. He was shy, somewhat awkward, and his handwriting was messy, which frustrated his teachers. Yet he had a unique charm, a sense of humor, and a spark that made him stand out. At the St. Albans School, he developed a passion for mathematics and physics, subjects that allowed him to explore the mysteries of the cosmos. By his teenage years, Stephen had already set his heart on studying the universe. He dreamed of becoming a scientist, even though he wasn't yet sure what path he would take. What he lacked in polished grades, he made up for with imagination, determination, and an unshakable curiosity that would soon guide him into one of the most extraordinary journeys in human history. At the age of 17, Stephen Hawking earned a scholarship to study at the University of Oxford, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. For many, entering Oxford was intimidating, but Stephen arrived with quiet confidence. Though he was younger than most of his peers, he quickly stood out not for relentless studying, but for his unusual ability to grasp complex concepts with little effort. Stephen chose to study physics, even though his father had hoped he would pursue medicine. At first, he found the courses surprisingly easy. While other students spent long hours buried in books, Stephen often studied only a few hours a day, yet still excelled in exams. He had an uncanny gift for visualizing problems in physics, running scenarios in his mind like a movie. Despite his brilliance, Stephen was not the stereotype of a bookish recluse. He loved rowing and joined the Oxford Boat Club as a coxswain, the small but crucial person who steers the boat and commands the rowers. His sharp voice and daring tactics made him popular among his teammates, even if his academic tutors sometimes felt he was not working hard enough. Socially, he was shy but witty. Friends remembered his sense of humor, his mischievous smile, and his love for practical jokes. Though not a top student in the traditional sense, he had a spark that made people take notice. He balanced work with fun, earning a reputation as both clever and charming. But beneath this seemingly carefree life, subtle signs began to emerge, moments when his balance faltered, or when he found his speech slurring slightly. At the time, neither he nor his friends paid much attention, dismissing them as clumsiness. Yet these small cracks were the first signs of the storm that was quietly gathering, one that would test him in unimaginable ways. After completing his undergraduate degree at Oxford, Stephen moved to Cambridge to begin postgraduate studies in cosmology, a field that fascinated him deeply. He was thrilled to be among brilliant minds, studying under the legendary physicist Dennis Sciama. Yet, just as his academic journey was beginning, troubling symptoms that had started quietly during his Oxford years began to worsen. Stephen noticed that he was becoming increasingly clumsy. He tripped more often, had difficulty with tasks requiring fine motor skills, and his speech sometimes slurred. At first, he brushed it off, blaming stress or overwork. But when his condition rapidly worsened, his family grew alarmed and urged him to see a doctor. In 1963, at just 21 years old, Stephen was given devastating news. He had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, also known as motor neurone disease. The doctors explained that the illness would gradually destroy his ability to move, speak, and eventually even breathe. They gave him only 2 years to live. For a young man at the start of his career, the diagnosis felt like a death sentence. Stephen sank into deep despair. He isolated himself, feeling that his future had been stolen. What was the point of studying the universe if he would not live long enough to make an impact? But even in those darkest moments, 2 things pulled him back from the edge: the support of his family, and meeting Jane Wilde, a bright young woman who would later become his wife. Jane's belief in him gave Stephen a reason to fight. Though he faced an uncertain future, Stephen made a decision that would define his life. He would not let the disease defeat his mind. If his body was failing him, then his intellect, his imagination, and his voice would become his tools to defy fate. After his diagnosis in 1963, Stephen Hawking faced a terrifying reality. The doctor's prediction that he had only 2 years left hung over him like a shadow. For a while, he fell into deep despair, withdrawing from his studies and isolating himself. The future he had dreamed of, unraveling the mysteries of the universe, suddenly felt meaningless. But life had other plans. Around this time, Stephen met Jane Wilde, a literature student at Cambridge. Jane was warm, optimistic, and deeply compassionate. Despite knowing about his diagnosis, she saw beyond his illness and fell in love with the man behind the frail body, a witty, brilliant, and passionate soul. Their relationship became a turning point. Jane gave Stephen something priceless: hope. Her unwavering belief in him inspired Stephen to continue his research instead of giving up. He began working under Dennis Sciama, one of the leading cosmologists of the time, and found himself reinvigorated. The world of physics, full of questions about black holes, time, and the origins of the universe, gave him purpose again. Stephen and Jane married in 1965, defying the bleak medical predictions. Their bond was more than romantic, it was a partnership of strength. Jane cared for him as his health declined, while also encouraging him to push forward with his work. She often said that faith, love, and determination carried them through the impossible. Instead of collapsing under the weight of his disease, Stephen grew stronger mentally. His illness slowed his body but sharpened his focus. He decided that if time was limited, he would use every moment to expand humanity's understanding of the cosmos. What began as tragedy transformed into a mission, and the world was about to witness the rise of one of the greatest scientific minds in history. With Jane's support and his own renewed determination, Stephen Hawking threw himself into research at Cambridge. Under the guidance of Dennis Sciama, he explored questions that lay at the very edge of human understanding: the nature of the universe itself. He became fascinated with black holes and singularities, points where gravity is so strong that the known laws of physics break down. At the time, black holes were mysterious and poorly understood. Many scientists dismissed them as mathematical curiosities rather than real objects. But Stephen thought differently. Using Einstein's theory of general relativity, he began working with mathematician Roger Penrose. Together, they demonstrated something astonishing. The same mathematics that explained black holes also suggested that the universe itself began from a singularity, the Big Bang. This groundbreaking idea shook the scientific community. It suggested that the universe had a definite beginning, not an eternal past as some had argued. Stephen's work was bold, elegant, and daring, and it marked him as one of the most promising young cosmologists of his time. Yet behind this intellectual triumph, his illness was advancing. Walking became more difficult, his speech was slower, and he needed increasing support from Jane and others. Still, Stephen pushed forward. His mind was racing faster than his disease, and he knew he had more to give. By the late 1960s, Stephen's reputation was growing rapidly. Colleagues marveled not only at his genius but at his resilience. Despite being given only 2 years to live, he was already years past his prognosis, breaking boundaries both in science and in life. To Stephen, the universe was vast, mysterious, and beautiful, and he was determined to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. In the early 1970s, Stephen Hawking made a discovery that stunned the scientific community. While analyzing black holes, he proposed that they were not entirely black. Instead, due to quantum effects, they could slowly emit particles of energy, a process now known as Hawking radiation. This meant that black holes could eventually shrink and disappear, a radical idea that shook the foundations of physics. The discovery linked quantum mechanics and general relativity, two theories that had long seemed incompatible. Scientists were astonished that a man battling a severe illness could produce such revolutionary insights. Hawking's work made him a global name and opened entirely new areas of research. His disease continued to progress, walking became nearly impossible, and his speech grew slurred. Yet he refused to let ALS define him. Instead, he pushed harder, determined to leave behind a legacy of ideas that would outlast his body. By the mid-1970s, Stephen was no longer just a promising scientist, he was recognized as one of the greatest minds of his generation. As the 1970s turned into the 1980s, Hawking's illness advanced relentlessly. Eventually, he lost the ability to speak. For many, that would have been the end of communication. But technology offered him a new voice. A computer system was developed that allowed him to select words on a screen using a small movement in his cheek. Through this, he could form sentences, later spoken aloud by a speech synthesizer. The voice was robotic, but it became iconic. It gave Stephen the power to lecture, write, and even joke with his unique sense of humor. He once said, "I speak with a computer voice, but it never gets sore." This adaptation allowed him to continue teaching, debating, and sharing his brilliance with the world. During this time, he also wrote his groundbreaking book, A Brief History of Time, 1988. The book simplified cosmology for ordinary readers and became an international bestseller, selling millions of copies. It turned Stephen Hawking into not just a scientist, but a global celebrity who inspired people far beyond the scientific world. With worldwide fame came opportunities and challenges. Hawking became one of the most recognized scientists alive, appearing in documentaries, television shows, and interviews. His sense of humor and refusal to pity himself captivated audiences. Despite being confined to a wheelchair and speaking through a machine, he projected optimism, wit, and brilliance. His marriage to Jane, however, came under strain. Years of illness, fame, and pressure weighed heavily on their relationship, and they eventually divorced in 1995. While painful, Stephen found companionship again with Elaine Mason, one of his nurses, whom he later married. His personal life was complicated, but his scientific influence remained steady. He used his platform to advocate for science education and disability rights. He reminded the world that people with disabilities are not defined by their limitations but by their possibilities. Stephen became proof that the human spirit can overcome almost anything. For millions, he was no longer just a physicist, he was a symbol of perseverance. In his later years, Hawking turned his attention to the future of humanity. He warned about threats such as climate change, nuclear war, and the risks of artificial intelligence if left uncontrolled. At the same time, he championed bold visions like the exploration of space and colonizing other planets. He believed that humanity must look beyond Earth to survive in the long term, urging governments and companies to invest in space travel. His speeches inspired a new generation of scientists and dreamers. Even as his health declined, his mind roamed freely across the cosmos, imagining futures far beyond our reach. In 2007, despite his condition, he experienced zero-gravity flight, floating weightlessly aboard a special aircraft. The image of Stephen Hawking, once told he had 2 years to live, smiling as he floated in space-like conditions, became an enduring symbol of human resilience and the limitless power of determination. Stephen Hawking passed away on March 14, 2018, at the age of 76, defying doctors' predictions by more than 5 decades. His death came on Einstein's birthday, another symbolic connection in the life of a man who became a legend. His contributions to physics, Hawking radiation, singularity theorems, and cosmology changed how we understand the universe. But his legacy was far greater than equations. He showed the world that even when the body is trapped, the mind can still soar to infinity. Through his books, lectures, and life story, Hawking inspired millions to embrace curiosity and resilience. His words remain timeless. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. He taught us that knowledge is power, imagination is freedom, and hope is stronger than fear. Stephen Hawking's life was proof that human potential has no limits. His legacy continues to remind the world that even in the face of impossible odds, one person can change the way we see the universe.